A very fine good evening to one and all. Hope you are all staying safe and healthy. Myself, Abhirami S., wholeheartedly welcome you all to today's session. Before we commence with today's session, I request all the participants, please make sure that your mics are muted and none of you gets engaged in any kind of presentations while the class is on. This is for the smooth conduct of our class. And also, there's an announcement for the participants of arbitration training program who are attending today's class that the LJRF has decided to conduct a meeting by next week for those applicants who had registered to attend the training program. The link will be sent to their respective Gmail IDs. So the applicants are requested to attend the meeting without any delay. As we all know, we have all successfully came over by knowing and understanding the basis of arbitration. Today, we are here to have our fourth session of arbitration on the topic jurisdiction and powers of arbitration. Now, I would like to invite Ms. Devika Essa, an enthusiastic law student, to officially welcome us all to today's session.
Thank you, Abhirami. Good evening, one and all present here. Myself, Devika. I would like to convey my gratitude to Law and Justice Research Foundation, LGRF, Trivandrum Chapter, and Cochin Institute of International Arbitration for organizing an effective arbitration program on the topic jurisdiction and powers of the arbitrator. I feel honored to have the opportunity to welcome you all for today's session. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce and welcome Honorable guest Rajiv Shankar Dwivedi, advocate on record and member of Bar Association, Supreme Court of India, and member of Chartered Institute of Arbitration. He has also participated and presented many papers in national and international seminars. Such a great person is an inspiration to many. It's a privilege to have you here, sir, for accepting our invitation and marking your presence. Welcome, sir. Welcome to this auspicious occasion. Now, I would like to move ahead with the responsibility of welcoming Advocate Johnson Gomez, sir, Director of Cochin Institute of Arbitration. We all are familiar with him from the very first session on arbitration law. I welcome you, sir, to this event. Now, I welcome, most importantly, the strong pillar and mentor of LJRF, Mr. Safi Mohan, sir, Assistant Professor, Government Law College, Trivandrum. Without his guidance and support, this can't be possible. I kindly welcome you, sir. Feedback is very valuable and we are grateful to receive feedback from listeners. So, I also welcome Ms. Amina to give review about our previous session. Next, I welcome the supportive coordinators Nilima V. Nair and Advocate Sunita S. in this wonderful session. And finally, I ensure you will feel enriched with much information after completion of this session. Once again, I welcome each and everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Devika, for your kind words. Before we move on to our next session, I will be indeed truthful to recollect what we have learned and discussed in the previous session. So that now I invite Ms. Amina to give a brief review about what we have discussed and learned through our previous session. Please, Amina.
Thank you, Abhirami. Good evening to one and all. As we know, this is our fourth session on arbitration, where Law and Justice Research Foundation, Trivandrum Chapter, and Cochin Institute of International Arbitration constitutes to make it more informative and special. Today, I am assigned to give a quick analysis of the previous session, which was happened on 21st November 2020, on the topic arbitration agreement and constitution of tribunals. Our key speaker was Mr. Anish Wadia, sir, a truly tremendous person. He is a pathway leader and course director of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, UK. He mentioned some of the relevant topics. They are arbitration agreements and its common mistakes, arbitrational tribunals, ad hoc manner, terminology like time, venue, seat, essential qualification of an arbitrator, essentials of arbitration clause, lex loci arbitri, doctrine of separability. That means arbitration agreement follows doctrine of separability that I'll be mentioning forward. So basically, an arbitration agreement should not have any room for ambiguities. For avoiding such ambiguities, checking the jurisdictional code and their interpretation of words, because we know legal cultures and interpretation varies as per different countries. specification of languages, always remind the using of universal terminology. Then second, award must be written in both local languages and in English, because some of the countries detect the importance of local language, example Baha'i, etc. Later I'll be defining that also. Okay, now an arbitrator must be a good engineer because it will enhance the drafting of agreements. 50% of success rely upon the arbitrators. Parties mostly prefer arbitrators who have both domestic and international experiences. So, as an arbitrator, we must update ourselves with international cases on arbitration. Arbitration cannot apply their own personal laws, and they should maintain a professional, ethical relationship with parties. A court-appointed arbitrator should respect the parties and must show justice to the clients, trying to finish the work with maximum speed with minimal amount of time. He did ignited the idea of applying practical aspects and mind works. According to him, whether be an arbitrator or an intern, we must clarify doubts, no rooms for ambiguity and confusions. Even minor technical mistakes can affect the whole arbitration process. The award may set aside if some confusion arises. We must understand the enforceability of codes and law of the place where it is going to be enforced. He also mentioned how Chinese arbitration is hard to follow for a non-Chinese arbitral institutions because they only add value to their own tribunals, like Chinese tribunals. Next, I'll be mentioning some basic aspects of arbitration. Lex loci arbitri. It is a Latin term which means law of the place where the arbitration took place. It's commonly used in conflict law situations, of course. So, lex arbitri means law of arbitration or law of seat. That means parties are free to choose the procedural rules guiding their disputes. It may refer to the arbitration rules applicable in the place of arbitration. Next, juridical seat. Suppose India is chosen as the juridical seat, then the Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996 will be the law of arbitration. If England is selected as juridical seat, then English Arbitration Act 1996 would be the law of arbitration. So, this is how juridical seat plays role. Mainly, there are two types of arbitration that we know: ad hoc arbitration and institutional arbitration. Personally, I prefer institutional arbitration. Is far easy and less confusing, but we should specify what rules are going to follow or opting out. India mostly follows ad hoc arbitration that Mr. Anish Wadia sir mentioned in the previous session. Arbitration takes place without referring to any arbitral tribunals. There will be no secretary, nothing. This is why most countries do not prefer ad hoc arbitration. Arbitral tribunal is a panel of one or more adjudicators, and they sit to resolve disputes by way of arbitration. Basically, we must pass two main streams. We have to confirm whether the court is competent to pass or enforce the award. If not, then there will be a scope of challenges. In an arbitration agreement, parties have the autonomy to choose two things. The first is the manner in which arbitrators to be appointed, which I will be later mentioning section 11 of Arbitration Conciliation Act. Then the second is the procedure. For example, if we are not going to take Indian Evidence Act, as we could decipher that we are omitting out, and we should specify what procedures we are going to collect for the evidences as evidence is concerned. Thus, Anish Wadia mentioned that whether we can opt for soft laws. UNCITRAL is an example for soft laws. Soft laws are not binding. It only means that it do not have legally binding nature, but the parties can agree to adopt it too. Means the soft laws. Thus, Anish Wadia sir mentioned that whether we can opt for soft law, suppose it made by IBA, thus we must mention it that way also, or ancestral rules, but it's a default provision of international arbitration. I mean, if we don't specify or forget to term any information regarding following or opting out rules on arbitration agreement, then it will be automatically fall into ancestral model rules. Then it will be strictly rely upon ancestral model rules. So what is opting out? Some of you will be still thinking, no need to worry, because it is like a term that has the meaning it as old. When parties decide to resolve their disputes with respect to contract in according with ICC arbitration rules, then all rules would apply immediately. For example, if we are opting out the fact fast track procedure, then we must confirm it, specify it in the agreement. Otherwise, it is less than a particular threshold value, it automatically goes under fast track mechanism. But if we terms like we follow ICC rules but not gonna follow a fast track arbitration, then ICC won't go for fast track arbitration for that particular arbitration agreement. He also mentioned that some people, in accordance with drafting arbitration agreement, what they do is that they want to proceed it with Singapore International Arbitration Center, seat in Singapore. Then it must happen in SIAC, but if we mention on the same arbitration that we follow ICC rules, then SIAC's scrutiny capacity will be interrupted. Actually, there was a case that Anish Wadia sir mentioned in the previous session, but later it was resolved. So by sum upping that, this we shouldn't conflict with our clients and their time. So Anish Wadia sir termed a word called Baha'i language. It is a local language. Some countries are strict for their interference with their own local languages in enforcing awards or the process of arbitration. On such situation, it is preferable to write and interpret in both local and English language. Suppose in a particular jurisdiction, there will be a Nivan like for an arbitration, we cannot simply apply Indian rules. We have to check deeply whether the award is going to enforce. We have to incorporate that sensitivity. Then only the execution can be done properly. Then we have to draft perfect arbitration clauses. Now moving on to the term doctrine of separability. If we have a contract, and on that particular contract, of course, one of the clause will be arbitration clause. Contract can have any allegation and it may be void. Suppose there is incapacity of parties, undue influence, etc. The contract may be void, but the arbitration clause still survives. That is the part the arbitration clause still have life. Thus, everything regarding the clause survives, and also the power of arbitrator or the tribunal won't lose their power, along with the voidness of contract, that particular contract. Arbitration tribunal constitutes with the arbitration clauses. If agreement is void, still the clause survives. According with the clause, we can appoint arbitrators. There will be a jurisdiction of 4 arbitrator. Arbitrator can say that contract is void, still the clause survives. Clauses have ambiguity. This is thus it is called pathological clauses. Here I would like to mention section 11, appointment of arbitrators. A person of any nationality may be an arbitrator unless otherwise agreed by the parties. Parties are free to agree on the procedure for appointing arbitrator or arbitrators. There are a lot more in section 11, so remember to read that section 11, Arbitration and Conciliation Act. It also mentioned about the appointment of sole, that means single arbitrator and or third arbitrator. It's simple, like if one party appoints one arbitrator, other parties don't, then appointed parties can seek help from competent court, and then court appoints second arbitrator, and the both arbitrators can appoint together for third arbitrators. But we have to make it clear that if the arbitration process is rely upon domestic, then parties can seek high court for appointing arbitrators, and if it is rely upon the international basis, then we have to go for the competent court that relies upon the Supreme Court. Okay, so Mr. Anish Vadia sir also showed his strong disagreement on the admission of denial. That means marking of documents. When arbitration process states, we have to file clear statement, produce supporting documents. It can mostly be mails, etc. Later, opposite party must file defense statement. Along with that, they produce bunch of documents. Then will be admission of denials, and according to Vadia sir, it is a total waste of time. So this were the review, analysis and definition based on my research. I am expressing my gratitude to Vadia sir and the warm person Johnson Gomez sir, because he really helped to clear all of my doubts and concerns on this particular area. So I hope everything regarding that previous session is not confusing anymore. And thank you. I would like to thank Sapi sir for trusting me for making the previous session's review. So I hope the participants and everyone present here have a fruitful session, because we have a wonderful speaker, Advocate Rajiv Shankar Dwivedi sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shamina. I hope this made us record what we have learned through the previous sessions. Now, I'm indeed delighted and honored to have with us our most respected speaker of the day, Advocate Rajiv Shankar Dwivedi, who is an advocate on record at Supreme Court of India, member of Chartered Institute of Arbitration, United Kingdom, and member of Palkiwala Arbitration Center, Chennai. We are very much pleased to have you with us, sir. Welcome, sir. And I would also like to welcome Advocate Johnson Gomez, sir, Director, Cochin Institute of Arbitration, who is a familiar face to us in the previous sessions and who has been with us as a strong pillar of encouragement and enlightening us with his valuable words throughout the past sessions. So I wholeheartedly welcome you both to today's session. Now, I would like to invite our most respected speaker of the day, Advocate Rajiv Shankar Dwivedi, sir, to proceed with today's session. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much for the nice words. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Johnson Gomez for giving me this opportunity to address such a wonderful gathering of law students and professionals. I'd also like to thank the Ms. Abhirami, who had given a very good backdrop of what had happened in the previous sessions, and the other speakers, what are the topics which they have covered and what all they have said, because we will continue in the same flow and we will take up from where they have left. One thing I noted that the emphasis of the previous speaker, it was very much on the international arbitration. What I propose to do today is to my major emphasis will be on the Indian perspective, because the topic which we are dealing today is extremely crucial, and that is in fact the core of the entire procedure. That is the jurisdiction and the power of the arbitrator. Now, to understand the jurisdiction and the power of the arbitrator, this will actually encompass the entire gambit of the Arbitration Act. The power is, and the jurisdiction, it is reflected in the entire, all the provisions, right from our constitution of the tribunal to the duties of the tribunal, to the power and jurisdiction, the procedure, the challenge process, everywhere. So it is one aspect which is covering right from the first section till the last section. I'd also like to request everybody to kindly have the Arbitration Act open on your screen, or for your benefit, I will share my act with you so that the portion which I have marked or which I have highlighted, you can also have see the same, and you don't need to rely separately on your other books and everything. Sir, may I share the screen?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Sure. From where? Present now. Okay. Just give me 2 minutes. So while I'm opening that, we should realize that what is the main source of the power and jurisdiction for the arbitrator. So if we will have a look at that, the sources, then it can be said about there are majorly 3 sources. One is by agreement, another is by law, and third is by the personality of the arbitrator. I'll take you people to each of them individually. Let me just open this. Can you see this? The screen, the Arbitration and Conciliation Act.
Yes, sir.
Okay, sir. Okay. So the entire concept of arbitration, where 2 private parties come together and request a third person, a private person, to adjudicate the dispute between them. This is the entire concept of arbitration. This has been coming since the time immemorial. If we look at the panchayat system of the old time, or the punch and somebody to settle the dispute, that the whole explanation or the whole definition of arbitration is the point from which emanates the power and jurisdiction of an arbitrator. If we see the court system, the judiciary, so judiciary has a power because the law says so, because the constitution says so. Arbitrator have the power because the party says so. That is why it is extremely crucial to know the genesis of both these powers. So in the case of arbitration, it is the arbitration agreement which can be said to be the source of the power. If we will see, the section 7 provides for the arbitration agreement. I'm sure you people are quite aware about the provisions of section 7. I'm also sure that you must be quite aware about all the provisions of the section. And even if you are not, let us go through them. There is no harm in admitting that we have not yet read them. Let us read them in the first instance also. So, arbitration agreement. What is an arbitration agreement? Arbitration agreement is an agreement between 2 individual parties and their willingness to refer the dispute arising between them to a private body, a third person who is independent of the 2, where both the parties, they vest their right, they vest their power to dispute, to adjudicate the dispute between them into this third person. Now this third person, since he is a creation of an agreement, therefore his power, his responsibilities, his jurisdiction, the extent of his power, the limit of his power, everything is determined by the agreement between the 2 parties, because he is the creation of that agreement alone. He cannot have anything independent to that. He cannot have anything beyond that. That is why Section 7 is the most crucial genesis of the power and jurisdiction of an arbitrator. Here, I'd also like to say that this portion can well be compared with, say, Section 124 of the Constitution, or Section 214 and 215 and 16 of the Constitution of India. Why I am saying so? Because these are the article which has conferred power, and the authority that the High Court or the Supreme Court they are deriving their authority from the Constitution. A judgment of the Supreme Court is binding upon everybody. Why? Because the Constitution says so. Similarly, the order of an arbitrator, award of an arbitrator, is binding upon the party. Why? Because the agreement says so. This is the significance of arbitration agreement. So when Mr. Anis Wadia said that you should be very careful about drafting the arbitration agreement, then you must know the reason why you should be very careful about drafting the arbitration agreement. Because by that arbitration agreement, you are bestowing authority, power, and jurisdiction over an arbitrator. What is the impact of that bestowing of the power? Let us come to straight away Section 17 of the Arbitration Act. If you'll have a look at the bottom of the page, can you see this? The portion which is highlighted in blue. The arbitral tribunal shall have the same power for making order as the court has for the purpose of and in relation to any proceeding before it. A man is raised to the pedestal of being a court. This is not an ordinary exercise. This is not a simple exercise. Look at the next one. Subject to any order passed in an appeal under Section 37, any order issued by arbitral tribunal under this section shall be deemed to be an order of the court for all purposes and shall be enforceable under the Code of the Civil Procedure. So that is why it is so important to carefully draft the arbitration agreement, because here a collection of 3 persons who are termed as a tribunal, they are elevated to a pedestal of being a court. Their word will be a word of court of law. That is why it is so important to draft the arbitration agreement very carefully. So this is the first source of power and jurisdiction of the arbitrator, which is called the arbitration agreement. The other 2 sources, one is by law. By law, I mean primarily the Arbitration Act, which defines and which details the power of the arbitrator. For example, some of the power which are directly fastened upon him or bestowed upon him. Some of the power are given where there is no agreement, there the arbitrator will have all the power. And why it is so important for the law to say so? Because those powers, they have consequences. The determination which are made by those powers are very significant and they are very vast reaching. Therefore, it is very important to give the power. And third, and the most important in my view, the most important source of power of an arbitrator is his personality. There are 3 I. intelligence, integrity, and image. So I will deal with this aspect at the end of my uh, submission and the end of my class or speech, whatever way you would like to say this. So let us once again start with section 7, the arbitration agreement. So all of you are well aware that the arbitration agreement, it has to be in writing. It may even be oral, or it may be by exchange of correspondence. If there was no earlier agreement, it can be done subsequent also. So that is why I say that this arbitration agreement, it is extremely important to draft it very carefully. This aspect has already been dealt with earlier. I will not repeat all those points. Now, if we will come to the next part, that is the composition of the arbitral tribunal, section 10(11). This part also, I am told, it has already been covered. But I'd like to point out and highlight those portions from this section which are important from the perspective of the jurisdiction and power of the arbitrator. See, most of you who are law students or the law professional, you may enter into the arena of arbitration either in two capacities. One as a lawyer and another is as an arbitrator. Let me tell you, that also is a very lucrative and lucrative in both senses, lucrative in the sense of work satisfaction and the monetary satisfaction both. So arbitrator, acting as an arbitrator is also a very good and a very attractive career perspective. And similarly, acting as an advocate for your client is also a very important a career perspective, a career prospect. In both these scenarios, it is very important for a professional to know the power and the limits on the power of the arbitrator. Because at the end of the day, whatever be your submission, the award has to be given by arbitrator. So what he can do, and more importantly, what he cannot do, you have to have an absolute mastery over this issue. And this is one aspect which transcends the domestic arbitration or international arbitration. I will not be going into the technical difference between the two, or what are the procedural difference between the two. I'm not going into that at the moment. For the procedural aspect, I'll be restricting myself to the Indian arbitration and the arbitration part of the Indian arbitration part of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act. So if we have a look at the composition of the arbitral tribunal, number one, it has to be a odd number for a very obvious reason, that if it is in the odd number, then in case of the difference of opinion, the chairman can take the call and a 2:1 or 3:2, that kind of finding can be given. In fact, very recently I came across a very interesting arbitration agreement. It was practically a three-party dispute. One party was NHAI, another party was the financial lender, and the third party was a road developer. Interestingly, the dispute between them had the clause of tribunal. It said that one representative from each party. Now, practically, all the three parties is having one representative on the tribunal, and there is no chairman. So, if the interest of two parties collide, then they will always have a 2:1 award, irrespective of the merit of the case or anything else. So that is why it is extremely important that the arbitration agreement must foresee all these kind of eventualities and take care of them. So number of arbitrator, it should always be odd. Then in Indian context, the default number is 3. Actually, it should be 1, but since the law says 3, so it should be 3. In case of Singapore, I think the default number is 1 only, and that is more practical and that makes more sense also, because in number of cases the value of the dispute is so less, and in that kind of dispute where the value are in terms of some lakh rupees or a couple of crore rupees, and there to have a 3-member arbitrator is another difficult issue. So section 10(11) is done. If we will have look at the duty of the arbitrator. So the first duty of the arbitrator, which are detailed in section 12, 13 and 14, that is to display his impartiality, display his neutrality, make a declaration that he is not connected with either of the party. I'm sure you must have been told about the 3 list: red list, orange list, green list. So if the arbitrator falls within the relationship which is falling under red list, then he cannot be arbitrator in those cases at all. If he is falling under the orange list, then with the consent of the party, he may act as an arbitrator. Or if he is falling under the relationships mentioned under the green list, so in that category, he just has to make the declaration, and if there is no objection, he can go on and act as an arbitrator. So all these lists, there's red, orange, and green. They are provided in the UNCITRAL law also. They are there in the standard and model guidelines also. But all those 3 lists, they have been very well encapsulated in 5th schedule and 7th schedule of the Arbitration Act. If you will go through the entire list given in the 5th schedule as well as the 7th schedule, it has given in great detail the relationship of the arbitrator with the party, with the dispute, with the council, everything. Why I am dealing with this aspect under the heading of power of the arbitrator? Because neutrality of an arbitrator, as I said, the personality part. A neutral arbitrator, an arbitrator who is a very transparent, who has made all the declaration. By default, he will command a respect. By default, he will be on a much higher pedestal. The parties would be more inclined to accept his words. So that is why all these grounds are provided therein. So if you kindly have clause 12.5. Now this 12.5 is very significant. I'll just read it out. It says, notwithstanding any prior agreement to the contrary, any person whose relationship with the parties or council or the subject matter of the dispute fall under any of the categories specified in 7th schedule shall be ineligible to be appointed as an arbitrator. So this 7th schedule is typically the red list as prescribed under the UNCITRAL law. But there is a proviso added to it. And this proviso has actually undone whatever was done by the red list of the UNCITRAL law. This proviso is not there in the UNCITRAL law. This proviso is not anywhere else. It is only in India that it has been provided that notwithstanding that the person who is an arbitrator was earlier the chairman of the same very organization. But if the other side give consent, or if the other side waive their objection, he can act as an arbitrator. Although that is the law and that has been followed, but in my view, this is one provision which has actually taken away whatever has been given by the entire section 12. Now, suppose if a party who is not in a position or who has been coerced or pressurized, so he can be pressurized to give an affidavit or give an undertaking under the proviso of section 12.5, and the person can act as a judge in his own case. So there are several such instances, but that is the position, and that also determines the power of an arbitrator. That also determines how the arbitrator would be perceived by the parties. Suppose if there is some person to whom I have been forced to give to accept him, I will never accept that person as a fair arbitrator or as a genuine arbitrator. So there also the power is derived from the perception also. So that is why I said that section 12 and the proper implementation of section 12 and 13 and 14 is quite important. Now then comes the next part, that the arbitrator has been given such an important position that any challenge to the arbitrator or about his competence is given to himself only. Suppose if I have any doubt, or if I want to challenge, or if I want to question the arbitrator, I do not have to go before any other authority. I do not have to go to the court. There is a principle of competence. This principle provides that the arbitrator is competent to decide upon a challenge about the ability of his ability to do a particular arbitration, or about his jurisdiction. So whatever challenge is there, it has to be raised in front of the same arbitrator. This falls from section 13. If you see the challenge procedure, so the parties are free to agree on a procedure for challenging an arbitrator. So suppose if the parties have agreed for a procedure, then that will supersede everything else. So whatever is the procedure that has been agreed by the party, that will be followed. 13 clause 2 starts with failing any agreement referred to in subsection 1. A party who intend to challenge an arbitrator shall within so and so and so and so send a written statement of the reason for challenge to the arbitral tribunal. This is the most important part. The challenge has to be made before the tribunal itself. And then come to clause 3. Unless the arbitrator challenged under subsection 2 withdraw, or the other party agree to the challenge, the arbitral tribunal shall decide on the challenge. So this is from where the power of competence emanate. So there are two exceptions to it. One is where the arbitrator who has been challenged, he says, okay, fine, I accept, it is correct, I withdraw. Or he say, okay, fine, I do not want to go into this. Let's not wash our dirty linen in public. I withdraw. Matter ends there. Or suppose if the other side also says, yes, you are right, I know this person is not correct, he should withdraw. Or the allegation which has been made about this person are correct. So wherever the two parties meet, or wherever they agree, again go back to 13.1. Or this entire process is based upon the agreement between the parties. So wherever the party agree on whatever point they agree, that will override all other provisions. So if the other party also agree, then also that arbitrator will go. But suppose if none of these two happen, then the arbitral tribunal, he shall decide on the challenge. He will hear what is the question or the challenge or to their jurisdiction, to their competence. Normally, what are the challenges which are made? I'll tell you. One challenge is made that the agreement is not a proper or valid agreement. Second, it says that I'm not a party to this agreement. Thirdly, it says that the dispute which has been raised is not arbitrable. But that part comes later also. Thirdly, it says that you are not having the sufficient qualification to act as an arbitrator. And there are other grounds which are mentioned in section 14 also. So all these points are raised there. But so from 13.3, you get that this challenge is to be raised before the tribunal. Now, what happens when the tribunal decides on the challenge? If a challenge under any procedure agreed upon the party or under the procedure under subsection 2 is not successful, the arbitral tribunal shall continue the arbitral proceeding and make an arbitral award. So what happens? You make a challenge, tribunal reject it, then they will continue with the entire proceeding and they will make the award. What happened to the person who has made the challenge? Come to clause 6, subclause 6. Where an arbitral award is set aside on an application made under subsection 5, the court may decide as to whether the arbitrator who is challenged is entitled to any fees. That is another aspect where it is suppose before that there is clause 5. I think I missed out that. Where an arbitral award is made under subsection 4, the party challenging the arbitrator may make an application for setting aside such an arbitral award in accordance with section 34. So he cannot challenge that order immediately. He will have to wait till the entire process is over, and it is only after the award is made he can challenge the award, and he will have one additional ground. The challenge to the jurisdiction of the arbitrator will be one additional ground. So this challenge will be by way of section 34 only. 34 gives with the in quite detail the process and the grounds for the challenge of the award. So the power of the arbitrator is so vast that the challenge of his power can be done before him only, and once if he has rejected, then he will go with the entire proceeding, make the award, and then it will be decided. So this gives a very vast power and jurisdiction to the arbitrator. Sorry. That is done. Now come to the next chapter, that is chapter 4, jurisdiction of the arbitral tribunal. This part we have dealt in the earlier portion also. The competence of the arbitral tribunal to rule on its jurisdiction. So this is the principle of competence. The arbitral tribunal may rule over its own jurisdiction, including ruling on any objection with respect to existence or validity of the arbitration agreement. So if you will recall, initially I had told you that the source of power, the first was by agreement, which was dealt in section 7. So whatever the party may agree, That will be their power by agreement. The second was the power given to him by law. This is the portion, section 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. These are the powers given to him by law. In fact, before proceeding further, I think I had missed out one point, so let me put that point also here first. The power given to him by agreement. As I told you, that arbitrator is a creation of an agreement. This is a positive as well as a negative dictum both. It means that arbitrator can do only what is told to him to do by agreement. It further says that what is not told to him, not empowered by parties by agreement, he cannot do that. For this particular provision, the relevant section where it has been detailed, I'll come to that section later. So what is that an arbitrator can decide? The arbitrator has to be bound by the strict parameters of the terms of the agreement, including the terms of the arbitration agreement and the relevant law. If you will see the court, especially the High Court and Supreme Court, they decide a case on the basis of fact, equity, the sense of justice, fairness, reasonableness, prudence. But these concepts is not available to an arbitrator unless it is bestowed upon him by a specific agreement by the parties. If you will have section 28 clause 2, there are two terms given there. Even when I was a student and when I first came across, I just skipped this part. It was so confusing. The word we could not understand. I also failed to say, why can't they have a simple words which we can understand in proper English or whatever language we use. But anyway, earlier the British and now we following the British, we have a very strong fetish of quoting the Latin or Greek language just to give out a principle of law. The term used here in section 28.2 is ex equato bono and amiable compositor. Now, what are these two terms? Ex equato et bono, it means according to what is equitable and good. Similarly, amiable compositor, the amiable composition clause is a conventional renunciation to the effect and benefit of the rule of law, the party losing the prerogative to request its strict application, and as a corollary, the arbitrator being empowered to modify or moderate the consequences of contractual provision, provided that equity or the well understood common interest of the party require it. If I put it in the plain and simple language, it means that the arbitrator can have the power to decide a dispute on the basis of equity, or the arbitrator can mold the consequence of the agreement, he has to have a specific authorization provided by the party. If there is none, he cannot do it. He has to go by the word of the agreement, even if that may be a bit unequitable, even if that may be a bit absurd or impractical or whatever that be. He cannot deviate from that. This is a serious fetter, a serious, a serious control over the power of the arbitrator. An arbitrator is not like a judge of a high court. He cannot say, okay, fine, whatever both the parties are saying, my sense of justice says that this is what should be done. This the arbitrator cannot do unless he is expressly authorized by the party. So this power or this lack of power or the control on the arbitrator's power is also the part of the power of the arbitrator by the agreement under section 7. Now coming back to the power under the law, these powers, as I told you, wherever the agreement of the parties is absent, the arbitrator will get the power. And I will demonstrate it from the further provisions of this act. I think I'll tell you all once again one more thing. This is something which I practice on myself. This is something which I tell to all my juniors or to all students who I interact with. Whenever you are going through a BEAR Act, rest assured in the first reading, you will not be able to understand it. Anybody who is saying that in the first reading of the BEAR Act, he understood everything is either the God directly or he is lying. There is no third way. In fact, by second or third reading also, if you are able to understand something, it will be a very good, big achievement. But read it again and again and again. Maybe by fifth reading, sixth reading, you will start understanding the term, you will start getting in the groove of what is given there. So read this as many times as possible. In fact, for this speech today, I downloaded a fresh Arbitration Act. I read it again once again, and I did all the marking. All this marking was done in last 1 hour only. So I also learned a few more things, a few new points. So read it as many times as possible. So again, we are saying that an arbitration clause which form the part of the contract shall be treated as an agreement independent of other terms of contract. Now, why this is so important? Suppose if there is an agreement which has been held to be null and void. That is what given in the clause B. Suppose if the same tribunal holds an agreement to be null and void, can some smart chap just get up and say, sir, since the entire agreement has been held to be null and void, and this arbitration agreement was also part of the same agreement, so now this is also null and void. So that has been saved. In an agreement or within the ambit of this agreement, this arbitration agreement survives. It holds its own flag of sovereignty separately. Suppose the time period of the original arbitration, the entire agreement has lapsed by say a flux of time. It does not mean that the arbitration agreement has also lapsed. The arbitration agreement will survive it. It will go much beyond it. It will go till the time the dispute has not arisen. It will survive till then also. So arbitration agreement is independent of the other part of the agreement. So these take care of 1A and B. If you come to clause 2, a plea that arbitral tribunal does not have jurisdiction shall be raised not later than the submission of the statement of defense. It is not left to the sweet will of the parties. Otherwise, no arbitration will ever reach to its logical conclusion. So before the first statement of defense, you have to raise whatever objection that you want. But a party shall not be precluded from raising such a plea merely because that he has appointed or participated in the appointment of an arbitrator. That's a very peculiar issue. Suppose I have nominated one arbitrator, and today I need to challenge him. Nobody can turn around and tell me, look, he is your nominee, how can you challenge him? No, I can challenge him if I find some ground, some sufficient material. Then further, a plea that the arbitral tribunal is exceeding the scope of its authority shall be raised as soon as the matter alleged to be beyond the scope of its authority is raised during the arbitral proceeding. Now, what does this exceeding the scope of its authority mean? The scope of authority is what is provided in section 7 or arbitration agreement. You have to do, sir, A, B, C, and D. You cannot do E, F, G, and H. You cannot go into section 28 to equo ad bono, ex equo ad bono aspect. So the moment arbitrator is exceeding the scope of its authority, a challenge can be raised at that very point of time. Similarly, there is an issue which is non-arbitrable. Now, what is the non-arbitrable issue? In an arbitration agreement itself, there are several agreements which will provide that suppose if there is a dispute of accounting, it will not be arbitrable. They can do so. So no accounting dispute can be raised in the arbitration. Similarly, there is fraud, there is criminal element. Those are the aspects which are non-arbitrable. And suppose if the arbitrator is entering into that arena, he is certainly exceeding the scope of his authority. And the moment he does so, he can be questioned, he can be challenged. But once again, challenge before whom? The same arbitrator. And he can decide this way or that way. As we have read in clause in section 13, that he will decide as and whatever he decides that can be challenged only in section 34. So there is a limitation till the time till which it can be raised. But at the same time, the arbitrator have also been given the power to condone the delay. That is given in clause number 4. Arbitral tribunal may in either of the cases referred to in subsection 2 or subsection 3 admit a latter plea if it considers the delay justified. Now come to the next one. The arbitral tribunal shall decide on a plea referred to in subsection 2 and 3, and where the arbitral tribunal takes a decision rejecting the plea, it can continue with arbitral proceeding and make an arbitral award. It is the same provision which was given there in section 13. If he decides to reject the objection, he will go on, he will decide the entire arbitration, he will make the award. The challenge will be only after the award is made and as per section 34. Now comes the portion which is the highest power given to arbitrator by the law. That is the power of interim measure. You must have been told about Section 9. Section 9 gives the interim power, but that power is to be exercised by the court. The power under Section 9 and Section 17 were almost coterminous, except for the fact that Section 9 was exercised by court and Section 17 was exercised by arbitral tribunal. But by an amendment which was done in the on 30th of August 2019, one major change has been made. Just a second. Yes. If we will have a look at Section 9, let us go to Section 9 for a moment. If you will see Section 9, a party may, before or during or at any time after making of arbitral award. So the power under Section 9 was at 3 stages. It was before, during, or after. Now coming back to Section 17. Here also, earlier the same provision was given here also, that a party may during or at any time after making the arbitral award, but before it is enforced. So the portion which has been omitted is given at the bottom of the page. So this portion has now been omitted. So now there is a difference between the power of the court and the power of the arbitral tribunal. The court may pass an interim order before the arbitration, during the arbitration, or even after the arbitration. But as far as arbitrator is concerned, now their power after 30th August 2019, that is just last year only, it has been restricted to the proceeding of during the arbitral proceeding. So, and a very vast power is given. It is like appointment of the guardian, interim measure of protection, preservation and interim custody or sale of any good, securing any amount in dispute, detention or prevention or inspection of any property, interim injunction or the appointment of a receiver. Now, let me tell you, the appointment of a receiver is one of the most important powers, or such other interim measures of protection as may appear to the tribunal, arbitral tribunal, to be just and convenient. So for the purpose of the interim measure, he may use his power, or he may use his sense of justice or the sense of convenience. I'm not sure if you people have already studied the Code of Civil Procedure or not, but let me assume that you must have. So in Code of Civil Procedure, there is Order 39, Rule 1 and 2, which gives the power of interim injunction, and that has 3 basic requirements. One is prima facie case, second is balance of convenience, and third is irreparable loss and damage to the other party. Those 3 principles are applicable here also. So under Section 17, the arbitrator has the power to decide all this issue. And then, as I had shown you in the beginning of my speech, that here he is treated as a court. His orders are treated as the order of the court. These orders are executable in terms of Code of Civil Procedure, or even this interim order, they are executable. So here he is at par with the court. So these are the power which he has. Next is one of the very important aspect, that is equal treatment of the party. If you remember, I told you that the third and the most important aspect of the power is the personality of the arbitrator. This section 18 is where that personality of the arbitrator is reflected. That is where, or that how the arbitrator is exercising the principles emanating in section 18 gives him all the three I, that is intelligence, integrity, and image. That is why it is extremely important that the provision of section 18 are followed to in the letter and the spirit. In my view, section 18 is the soul of the entire Arbitration Act. And that is equal treatment of the parties, come what may. And this is a correct application of section 18 is what makes a difference in the quality of an arbitration proceeding. Then if we'll come to section 19, where the power of an arbitrator has been made larger than the court even. The arbitrator is not bound by ICC or by Indian Evidence Act. Sir, I'll need to take this call. I'll be back in one moment, sir. Hello. Sorry. So where was I? Just a second. Just a second. Let me just share the. Yes, sir. So I was saying that the power of the arbitrator is much wider than that of the court, because the arbitrator has been said that they are not bound by the Code of Civil Procedure or the Indian Evidence Act. Then it further says that parties are free to prescribe any procedure, but it goes on to further say that where there is no procedure prescribed by the parties, then the tribunal will formulate its own procedure. And this, let me tell you, is a very big power. Mostly we have seen that the arbitration agreement, they skip clear of this part. And that is why Anis had said that it is very important to make the and to formulate the arbitration agreement very carefully. All these points, if you do not want to give much leverage or much liberty or much latitude to the arbitrator, then all these aspects must be clarified and jotted down in the agreement. Because in all these aspects, you will see that wherever the parties have not provided in the agreement, the freedom has been given to the arbitrator to decide whatever way it wants. So if you will see the clause 3, 19 clause 3, failing any agreement referred to in clause 2, arbitral tribunal may, subject to this part, conduct the proceeding in the manner it consider appropriate. Now this subject to this part, what does this mean, subject to this part? Subject to this part is section 18. Arbitrator cannot prescribe for a procedure which will be against. So whatever procedure is there, it must give equal treatment to the parties. There can be no doubt about it. There is no question about it. Then again, the fourth is there, that it just gives an enumeration that what are those power. It is not exhaustive. It is just an example given, that it includes power to determine the admissibility, relevance, materiality, and the weight of any evidence. This is something extremely important. Now, next comes the place of arbitration. As you all have been explained about the concept of seat, venue, and how they are relevant, how seat is different from venue, how seat is so important that if you will see every year, there are so many judgments on this aspect. And what happens in such an important part of arbitration if the parties have not decided on this aspect in their agreement? What happens then? Because if you will see 20 clause 1, the parties are free to agree on the place of arbitration. And what happens if they have not agreed on the place of arbitration? Failing any agreement referred to in subsection 1, the place of arbitration shall be determined by the arbitral tribunal. And what is the only fetter over the tribunal? That they have to take into consideration. They have to give regard to the circumstances of the case, including the convenience of the parties. Seat decide the court. Seat decide the jurisdiction. And that decision has been left upon the arbitrator. And only fetter over that is convenience of the party, circumstances of the case. This is the extent of the power of an arbitrator, where the drafter or the drafting council of the arbitration agreement have not prescribed for this place of arbitration. Normally, the arbitration agreement are called to be graveyard shift clause. Why? Because that is a period when both the parties are in agreement with each other, and they wish and hope that there would be no dispute between them. And by the time the clauses and the drafting they continue, they go till wee hours, say late night or early hours of the morning. And when they come on this part, they say, just leave it here. You put anything and just get done with this. We are all very tired. And that is where one of the worst arbitration agreement come into existence. And when dispute arises, then all that irresponsible way of drafting and all things, they come to and stare on the face of the parties. That is why I once again reiterate, whenever you are drafting an agreement, give due importance and full importance to the arbitration clause. Because wherever parties are silent, wherever arbitration clause are silent, arbitrator will become more and more and more strong. Then again, language. If the parties have not decided on the language, the arbitrator will decide. The arbitral tribunal may order that any documentary evidence should be translated. Then the arbitrator also has the power of allowing amendment or taking the additional document on record. So these are the power which actually emanate from the act and which is beyond the agreement. So these are the power and these are the procedural power which the arbitrator has been given by the act to control the entire proceeding. Then whether to have the hearing or whether to have the written proceeding, this is also a decision which the arbitrator has to take. Then again comes the aspect of the default of the party. Suppose one party has failed to appear, then to have an ex parte proceeding. The ex parte proceeding is, suppose if one party has not appeared, then court will wait, court will send the notice again, the tribunal will also send the notice again. but say despite valid service of the notice that that party is deliberately not appearing, then in that scenario the tribunal cannot wait endlessly. So it has to proceed ex parte. Ex parte means without the appearance of the other side. But merely because the proceeding are going ex parte, it does not mean that whatever the claimant has said, it has to be accepted. If you will see clause 25.b, the arbitral tribunal may continue the proceeding without treating the failure of allegation and shall have the discretion to treat may continue terminate. So even there, the claimant has to prove their case. Merely because the other side is not appearing, it does not mean that the whatever claimant has said, it has to be accepted. So in the case of default also, the arbitrator has got lot of power. Then arbitrator also has the power to appoint an expert. I think I'm exceeding my time. What, Mr. Gomez? Mr. Gomez.
Yes. We have 10 more minutes. I think that there is an interactive session as well. We have to conclude this.
Okay. Because once I start, I just go on and on. Okay, sir. So these are the powers. I think I have covered most of the aspects. Just one important aspect that is left out. This section 28 I have already covered. Is section 34. Arbitrator has got a very important power of levying of the cost. If you'll have section 31 clause 4, the arbitral tribunal may make an order under this section, including the order that a party shall pay a proportion of another party's cost or a stated amount in respect of another party's cost. So the power to impose a cost, that also is one of the a major power of the arbitrator. Now, correction of the award, interpretation of the award, additional award. Suppose if there is a prayer made in the there is a prayer in the statement of claim, but on which there is no award by the arbitrator, and parties have made a request that you have missed out from giving any finding on this prayer. So he may give the additional award also. So these are also the part. Section 34. Now, the manner in which an arbitrator has exercised his authority or failed to exercise its authority is a very important ground to challenge the award. If you will see section 34, clause 2, subclause 4 and 5. So it is a very difficult exercise. The seat of arbitrator is not a bed of roses, rather it's more a seat of thorn. So he has to be very balanced. He has to be very careful. And that is where the third aspect of the third source of power comes. His integrity, his intelligence, and what kind of image he is carrying. So if any of you is planning to become an arbitrator, make sure to keep all the three eyes intact and shining, because that is where the maximum part of the power is going to come to you. And that is it. So if you have any question or any doubt, you can raise it, and I will just stop the sharing.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for your enlightened words. Participants, you can unmute your mics and you can ask the questions and clarify the doubts.
Before asking the question, I'll request just give your name or your class What happened? There's no questions. So normally the participants are from which year?
Secondary country.
Yes, Joseph. What did you say?
I am from secondary country. Country.
So you are from second year. Okay, okay, okay. So Mr. Johnson, I think there are no questions.
Yes, I think that we can proceed for concluding the session. I think that the session was taken in such a manner that all the important aspects have been covered. And briefly, I think that three concepts were introduced where the source of power of the arbitrator was mentioned. That is, one is the agreement, the second is the law, and the third is the personality. And three I's were mentioned. I think that this is the brief of the whole story. And I think that every provision has been meticulously addressed, and that seems to be the lawyer's approach towards a matter. And there are different perspectives that we can see: an academician's perspective, a lawyer's perspective, and
students' perspective as well.
Yes, perspective as well. So thank you very much for joining us in this session. We are thinking of having a continuous program where we are trying to work on a course itself, and we may have to at times come and bother you at some point of time for coming back with another session.
Sure. I'll be always happy to join you in this exercise, and I'll also recommend that we should have some sessions on Contract Act, because that is one of the most important aspect of any dispute.
Correct, sir. We are having such sessions happening on the sidelines. LJRF is one organization that is consists of a lot of academicians, and there is a blend of academicians as well as professionals from various fields coming and joining hands. And I think that this will be a very helpful protocol to be taken forward, and that will be helpful for young lawyers in the making. So thank you, sir. Abhirami,
It is.
We have kept the time meticulously.
Thank you very much.
I hope there are no more questions to ask, so the interactive session is over. Thank you both of you speakers for your valuable words, and also a very special thanks to Advocate Rajiv Shankar Dwivedi sir for sparing your time and enlightening us with your valuable words. And I also would like to thank Advocate Johnson Gomez sir for being with us throughout the past sessions. And now we would have come to the end of today's session. I would like to invite Ms. Srilakshmi to deliver the vote of thanks.
Abhirami, one second. I want to point out one thing. Today, Amina has presented the review. I think that, that it needs to be mentioned specifically during the last. We had a lot of ambiguous terms being used, and many of the students might not be familiar with many of the terms and terminologies which are, and she necessarily needs to be what we call, her effort should be mentioned specifically while we conclude the session. That's what I feel.
Okay, sir.
Sure.
Okay, now I would like to invite Mr. Lakshmi to deliver the vote of thanks.
Good evening, everyone over here. Honorable Chief Guest, Advocate Rajishankar Dwivedi sir, respected Advocate Johnson Gomez sir, Safi Mohan sir, and all the participants. I deem it a great honor and privilege to propose the vote of thanks in this informative occasion. First and foremost, on behalf of CIIA and entire fraternity of Law and Justice Research Foundation, an organization of diligent legal individuals, extends a hearty vote of thanks to our chief guest, Advocate Rajishankar Dwivedi, also another valuable person, Advocate Johnson Gomez sir, for their efforts and contributions to make this event exemplary. Initially, I would like to mention deep sense of appreciation towards our most invited special guest in this today's session, Advocate Rajishankar Dwivedi, advocate on record at Supreme Court of India, member of Chartered Institute of Arbitration, United Kingdom, member of Palkiwala Arbitration Center, Chennai, for his explanation and excellent coverage on the topic jurisdiction and powers of arbitrator. It gave a deep insight into the topic and also very interesting and enlighten us with a lot of information. I'm pretty sure that it will help us in our studies and in future career. I'm indebted to convey the regard to you, sir, who, despite his busy schedule, found time to grace this occasion. Thank you, sir, for your valuable contribution. Further, would like to acknowledge our gratitude towards Advocate Johnson Gomez, sir, Director of Cochin Institute of International Arbitration, for being with us in this session, for his words of encouragement. His able guidance has always encouraged us. I thank him for his vision, interest, and continued support. Thank you, sir. I also take this opportunity to extend my sincere gratitude towards the strong pillar of Law and Justice Research Foundation, Mr. Safi Mohan sir, Assistant Professor of Government Law College, Thiruvananthapuram. Without your support and guidance, it won't be possible, sir. Thank you so much for your guidance, kindness, commitment, and also for the inspiration that gave us strength and courage. Thank you, sir. I must also appreciate the coordinating faculty for the enormous support behind this. Finally, and most importantly, I convey my extreme gratitude to all the participants, which are the assets of this event, thanking you each and everyone for your attention and for supportedly aiding to make this event worthwhile. Once again, thank you all for the togetherness, which is the strength of our team. Thank you.
Thank you, Sri Lakshmi. Now, there's a reminder for the applicants for arbitration training program who are attending this class today that LJRF has decided to conduct a meeting by next week for those applicants who had registered to attend the training program. So the link will be sent to their respective Gmail IDs. The applicants are requested to attend the meeting without delay. And also, the interested LJRF members can join today's second session, that is Neyarvadi, Non-Institutional Treatment and Rehabilitation of Offenders in Kerala. The session will be till 7:30 p.m. Thank you all again for your valuable participation in today's session. And now we declare the session is officially over. I hope you are all staying safe and healthy. Thank you.